Here specifically, the governor is addressing the future of gun laws. We know that this always comes to the forefront of the conversation following mass shootings here in this country. But let's switch gears and really just talk about the logistics of what's actually occurring. We have Dr. Carole Lieberman joining us live from Los Angeles, California. Dr. Carole, right there in your home state, we have witnessed 3 mass shootings within the past 8 days. I mean, from your medical standpoint, you're also a forensic psychiatrist. What's your initial reaction?
Well, what I think is one of the most interesting aspects of it, I mean, first of all, of course, it's a tragedy, and it's really not right for politicians. I mean, it happens all the time, but Governor Newsom is taking advantage of this for political aims, and that's not right. It's a tragedy. And what's most interesting is that, particularly in the first 2 shootings, that there are so many similarities between the 2. And I believe that the second one is a copycat shooting. Now, both of the shooters were older Asian men. They both used guns, obviously, shooting. They targeted 2 places, and they had worked or formerly worked at them. Now, the man in Monterey Park, there are different reports. Some say that he was an instructor, a dance instructor at the Star Ballroom. Others say that he was he was not employed there, but he just, acted informally as a dance instructor. But anyhow, so in both cases, it had to do with work in a sense. I mean, there was that relation. Also, with the Monterey Park man, it is said that he was jealous, that he may well have been jealous of his ex-wife, being invited to this party for the Lunar New Year, and that he wasn't. And in Half Moon Bay, there was some work issue that he had. What's also, and in both of these cases, there were things that happened before that should have given people sort of a warning. With Monterey Park, although he had never been violent before, his ex-wife said that he had a temper, he had a short fuse, and that she gave us an example of that, the fact that when he would be dancing with her, they met at the dance ballroom, and when she would make a misstep, he would get very angry because he didn't want other people to think that he was a bad teacher. And with the man from Half Moon Bay, he had a previous incident too with a coworker. In 2013, he threatened his coworker, who was also his roommate, because he had been fired from the shooter had been fired from the restaurant that they worked at, and somehow he was blaming this man or wanting this man to get his paycheck, and the man took out a TRO against him. And then there is some evidence, obviously, that's psychiatric issues, I think, in both cases. In the Monterey Park case, the man had gone to the police station not long before the shooting, and he started complaining about being poisoned by his family and other kinds of complaints. So there's evidence of, and in Half Moon Bay, the first incident with his roommate, clearly there was it showed some degree of mental problems, let's just say. So the moral of the story, besides how tragic it is, not only for the people who were killed and injured, but obviously for the observers and for the communities. So the moral of the story is that really we need to be more aware of people's mental health, and to be able to predict that something like this could happen, and to take some steps really to get them help.
And Dr. Lieberman, let's talk a little bit more about the possible warning signs, because something like someone's wife complaining of a short temper, that might just be personality type, right? So when exactly do we cross over into the fact that maybe we need to report this to a mental health expert, or start making some documentation of a certain behavior that we may notice in someone?
Yes, I mean, sure. There are lots of wives or ex-wives who might say that their husbands had a short temper. It's true. But there are other signs, that are perhaps very subtle. But I mean, even the fact that he would just recently have gone to the police. Paranoia, obviously, was the issue.
Paranoia.
Similarly with the mushroom farm. It seemed like that man had paranoia when he, tried to smother his coworker and roommate in 2013. They had these ideas, whether they rose to the order of delusions or what, but they felt ashamed, first of all, for something, and then also thought that someone was to blame, and they took it out, in their shootings. But there's another part to this puzzle these days, which is that we're America, well, not just America, but let's just talk about America. After COVID and the lockdowns, we are in a very strange state of mind, everybody, to some degree. We have shorter tempers. We all do to some degree. People are depressed. People are anxious. People are, not really knowing how to get back into society. We've been locked down for so long, and now, we're sort of coming out of that, but everybody is still in a very shaky kind of state. And so even though maybe these two men, for example, wouldn't have done anything before COVID, before the lockdowns, the way that we are now, we're in a very fragile state. And so things can set people off more easily.
Dr. Lieberman, you mentioned the impact that mass shootings in general can have on the community that it's affecting. Let's talk about the police response for a moment, because police in Monterey Park took 5 hours to then warn the public that the gunman could possibly still be on the loose. What do you think about that response? Is there anything to learn from that situation? And moving forward, how can the community as a whole kind of heal from this situation? Because it looks like mass shootings are not going to end anytime soon. So is this something that we should be bracing for, the everyday community member? For example, at the job, we have mass shooting, active shooter training. Is this becoming such a common occurrence, possibly, that the everyday community member needs to maybe brace for the possibility of this happening in their own neighborhood?
Well, it is becoming a more frequent occurrence. And when you think about it, mass shooter training at work, mass shooter training in schools, I mean, yes, this is not really the way to live. We of course we should have a plan. But you don't expect, you don't really expect it. Particularly in Monterey Park, they were celebrating the New Year, and it was such a contrast, to how everybody was happy and dancing and singing, and the whole community was dressed up and all of that, and all of a sudden this gun violence, it was like hard to believe, it just didn't fit in that scenario. But one thing, and this doesn't really, I don't think this applies to these shootings, at least not the two Asian men in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay. But in general, I've been saying for a while now that we are going to see an increase in mass shootings, like in school shootings and general mass shootings, because during the lockdown, many people, now not these older Asian men, but people who go online and play violent video games, it's called bedroom terrorists. These are people who have been basically practicing during 2 years plus on these violent video games, and then they come out into society and they are ready for bear. And that is when I wasn't talking about these kinds of shootings. I don't think these men were playing violent video games, but in general now, we do need to be more careful about that. Is the answer gun control? Like Governor Newsom was saying, I don't think that's the, maybe for AK-47s or those kinds of things, but it's a very slippery slope when you start controlling guns.
Yes, and that's a totally separate conversation. So many different caveats to this talk. I would love to have you back on to talk about the influence that COVID-19 has had on our psychological state, because that's a very interesting conversation to have. But before I let you go, any final thoughts that you would like to add?
Well, just that, we need to be, it sounds trite, but we need to be kinder to one another. You never know what somebody is going through, and we just need to be extra kind to each other these days.
Agreed. All right, Dr. Carole Lieberman, forensic psychiatrist. Thank you so much for joining us here.
You're welcome.
Be kinder to each other. All right, guys, the time is now 7:45 a.m.